The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, welcome everybody. I know that we have a bunch of attendees that have signed up already. We're going to give everybody just a few minutes to jump aboard. This is Damian Bianchi with the Linus Group. I'm the Director of Digital Strategy, and I'm also online here with Hamid, our founder, who's
Hi there.
who founded Linus Group almost 20 years ago. And for those of you that don't know us, we are a creative digital agency that specializes in consulting with life science and healthcare companies and brands. And so we're just going to give everybody a couple minutes here. We'll probably start about 16 after. So there'll be a brief pause before we get started.
And we see a few more attendees just joining right now. So we'll get started in just a minute. Damian, I'm excited about this.
Yeah, me too. We've been brainstorming and working on this and assessing a lot of the respondents for quite some time. So anxious to share what we found and hopefully it's helpful information for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think we can get started.
Okay. Well, again, thank you all for attending. Again, we're very excited to share the digital transformation in the life science and medical industries. The Linus Group, for those of you that just joined, if you are not aware of us, we're a creative digital agency that specializes specifically in life science and healthcare. Hamid, who is our founder, is going to be presenting along with myself today. Linus has been in business for over 20 years, and we've been very busy tracking the movement and the evolution of marketing within life science as well as healthcare. And so what we're going to be sharing with you today are some recent findings. We did a similar study about a year ago, and like I said, are hoping that this is some useful information. We're going to jump right into it because we realize everybody's busy and doesn't have a lot of time. For those of you on the West Coast, we know you're spending your lunch hour with us, so hoping this is some good information for you. The contents of today's webinar are fairly straightforward. We're going to define, digital maturity is a fairly broad term, and we're going to share with you how we define that and why it's important to our industry. We're going to share with you some benchmarks that we found that are industry-wide. And then more specifically, where we're probably going to focus the majority on the webinar is at the end, where we have some specific takeaways that we're hoping help you inform your own journey with digital transformation and digital maturity. So with that, we're going to jump right into this, and I'm going to pass it over to Hamid to talk a little bit about our methodology and how we take a look at digital maturity.
Awesome. Thanks, Damian. Hey, just one quick comment. If you have any questions, write them in the question box of your GoToWebinar control panel. This presentation is going to take about 25 minutes or so, but we'll have about 10 or so minutes for Q&A. So please do jot down your questions. I'm interested in hearing them, and Damian and I will discuss them. Yeah. But jumping right in, I mean, digital maturity is a broad term, but very specifically, in my experience and in our experience working with our clients, practically every single company in life sciences and medical is really focused on digital disruption on their markets. And so there are these unprecedented digital disruptors that are present today that have never been there before. And so it's really key to have a roadmap for how every company and how every marketer should react. So the bottom line is that there are three key things that we need to think about in order to succeed. The first one is, what's a framework for how we move the needle for digital maturity? The second one is, what's the roadmap? How do we get from here to there? So first of all, it's the framework. It's like where we have to define where destination is. The second one is we need a roadmap for charting our path to that destination. And then the third is an objective assessment of where we are as an industry and then where you are individually. And that's exactly why we've developed this digital maturity index. And then in order to really delve into this, we asked 3 key questions. The first one is, what are the critical factors? What's going to make or break digital maturity? And then the second one is, how is it appropriate for science and healthcare? And then the third one is, hey, what's the industry doing today, especially what the high performers are doing today? And so in order to do that for a framework, we worked on developing a questionnaire, which some of you answered, that was largely based on a framework originally created by Capgemini, which is a consulting firm. And Capgemini, what they did was they looked at 2 really critical facets. One they called digital intensity, and then the other one they called transformation intensity or transformation management intensity. Essentially, digital intensity is a company's ability to, or intensity in investing into infrastructure for digital stuff. And then the second one is a company investing in management of know-how of how to bring about change or transformation. And so as you can see, there's 4 quadrants, and they named these 4 quadrants. So you know, on the high side of the digital intensity, you see the fashionistas. These are the people who, or companies who have high digital intensity, low management intensity. So they've got the stuff, but they have not yet put effort into making sure management knows how to bring about digital change. On the upper right is the digerati. Those are the people that just have an equal amount of investment in both. And then on the bottom side, you have beginners and conservatives. So conservatives are ones who have the know-how but don't make the investment, and beginners are ones who have neither the investment nor the know-how. And so, okay, so you know what? Digital and marketing are sort of synonymous with each other, but I just want to make a point that what we're talking about is a company's ability to become digital in all of its processes here. Later, we're going to show you a tactical framework for digital marketing, but this is just your overall digital framework. So if you think about it, there's all these key performance indicators, but let's just say that none of that stuff matters. Let's say there's 3 things that your stakeholders care about. The first is revenues. So how does digital maturity affect revenues? This is top line revenues. And as you can see, this is again from research done by Capgemini over something like 400 different industries, where we see that digital intensity actually positively affects revenue. So Damien, if you go to the next slide here, we can see the numbers where essentially the fashionistas as well as the digerati enjoy a higher revenue generation than the control group, and the beginners and the conservatives have a lower amount of revenue that based on the average of the control. So here we see revenues are positively affected by digital intensity. So that's really the key driver. The next one's profitability. That's the bottom line. So revenues are the sales, profitability is the bottom line. Here, actually, the dividing axis is the transformation management intensity, where you see that if companies have the know-how, if they have the know-how and the infrastructure, they're just rocking it on the revenues. But if they just have the know-how and don't even put the money into the infrastructure, they're still gaining more revenues than other companies. And the beginners and the fashionistas, or I'm sorry, profitability, and the beginners and the fashionistas are behind as far as profitability. It makes a lot of sense. If you don't have the capability or the know-how, you're really waiting for the market to tell you what to do and how to act. And even if you have the stuff but don't have the know-how, you're still losing the potential opportunity for driving profitable business. I mean, if you can, it does make a lot of sense that profitability is a key outcome of digital, because it's it has the option to be more efficient. And then the third one, especially in our industry, because there's so many mergers and acquisitions, is market valuation. So companies that have invested into the management intensity, again on the right side of this, tend to have a higher valuation than companies that have low management intensity. And clearly the beginners have the lowest amount of market valuation. So, if you are within a company that has, whose stakeholders care about revenues, profitability, or market valuation, this is where you can do something about it. And I can tell you with certainty, I have not met with a company in the life sciences or the healthcare industry where one of these three, if not all three, are top priorities to their stakeholders. So it is a direct line into improving your company's performance overall.
Right.
So we actually mapped 155 respondents to this quadrant. And Damien, let's go to the next slide where we can actually see where all of the respondents fell. And it shouldn't necessarily be a surprise, but I'm sorry. We're going to go through who these respondents were first. Damien, you want to take that, and then we'll talk about where everybody fell.
Yeah, sure. So I'll do this relatively quickly, but we did want to share where all the different respondents, what were their business roles, what types of companies did they come from. As Hamid mentioned, we had 155 total participants, and if we're going to be tracking the movement and the evolution of marketing within these industries, we wanted to get a good sample size. And as you see here on the slide, this shares the demographics and the specific business roles. So a lot of marketing roles. We had marketing directors, senior marketing managers, some CEOs, presidents and owners of various businesses, vice presidents of marketing. And we also had a nice representation of different sales roles. We didn't want to just have exclusively marketing roles. So we had some sales managers and vice presidents of sales and a handful of others that made up a good mix of specific business roles. As far as primary functions go, you can see the business development, strategic marketing, product marketing, sales, digital marketing, corporate communications, all made up a good mix of the respondents. I'm not going to read out each and every single one of those, but we did want to let you know that we had a very nice sample size and a nice mix of different roles and functions. And then as far as the organizational types, as you can see here, a lot of respondents were from companies that specialized in analytical instrumentation. Lab kits, reagents, and consumables were obviously up there, as well as scientific services and general laboratory products. We had a handful of others that made up towards the bottom of the graph there as well. But we felt like it was a good mix of organizational types, specific business roles, and primary functions. As far as company size by revenue goes, those of you that work in the industry are very aware of this, that it's made up of a lot of smaller companies and then a handful of very, very big companies, right? So you can see this reflected in the revenue. About half of the respondents were from companies that were somewhere between 1 and 50 million in revenue. We had about 15% of the respondents between 100 and 500 million. And then to my earlier point, 15% of them were from companies that had revenues of over 2 billion. So a nice mix of different company sizes and obviously, as you're going to see here in a minute, reflects different priorities from a marketing standpoint.
And really representative of the market from what we see is, there's a handful of companies that are really large. There's a few companies in that sort of 50 or 100 million to about just under $1 billion, but then lots and lots of smaller companies that are starting up and moving. So very representative by the number of companies.
Right. So one of the first questions that we asked was, how much of your total annual program budget is spent on the following marketing goals? And you're going to see that over half of the respondents were spending money on, and it's not a huge surprise given that we're in a marketing conversation, but lead generation and branding were made up more than half of the overall budgets. Sales support, nurturing leads, and then a handful of other goals made up the rest. But the lion's share is, as those of you in marketing know, is really does focus on lead generation and branding, which is really interesting because when we share priorities from respondents, there's almost a little bit of a gap between money that's being spent, like budgets that are allocated, and what people are claiming as being a priority. So had some interesting findings around that we'll share here in a second as well. And so as far as priorities go, we had each of the respondents ask, or we asked them, what are your top three priorities? And the ones that came up were, the first one was global, right? Building and refreshing a brand in various global markets. The second and the third, I think, are tied together very closely, generating effective inbound content and then gaining customer intimacy and understanding customer needs. Right, and which makes sense, because inbound is really where your customers are raising their hand for help. Your job as a marketer is to give them the information that they need to progress along their buyer journey. So when you really understand what your customer is looking for, that's when you can create that nice inbound channel, right? That's helping them progress along their overall digital and their overall buyer journey. The bottom three, I'm not going to spend a lot of time focusing on this, but one of the things that did jump out at me as a surprise was implementing marketing technology. Not a big priority. And given all the information that's out there about artificial intelligence and marketing automation and all the platforms that are available to us as marketers, that was a surprise to me, because I was thinking that there would be a lot more investments and that would be a top priority. But part of our opinion here is that a lot of people, I think, are playing this smart, where it's almost a wait and see game. Right? We don't necessarily want to jump aboard things like artificial intelligence or various marketing automation platforms until they see, what's the real true return on this investment. So that was an interesting one that came up as far as not being a priority. But again, just to recap, the top three were global, inbound, and gaining a true understanding of what your customer is really interested in. So Hamid, do you want to talk through just the quadrants here? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a scatter plot of the 155 responses that we received about where the industry really is along the digital maturity index. Like I said, this is overall digital maturity, not just marketing. And the diamond that you see is the mean. It's the average of where the industry is. And as you can see, there's not very many people who are in the conservative quadrant. There are a handful of people in Digerati. The fashionistas actually are the second highest, and clearly as an industry, we believe, because this is a self-assessment, with our tool, we are categorizing ourselves as beginners. So, again, going back to all the key drivers of business success with revenues and profitability and market valuation, this is clearly not what any business wants to be, is in that beginner quadrant, because no matter how you cut it, the beginners really lost on all those key areas. And we see, because we've done this from year to year, we see a trend going from beginner very slightly toward fashionista, but generally speaking, the data didn't really move from year to year either, which means that the industry is really not really contending with that. So actually that might explain, Damien, why technology implementation was a low priority. So
right.
So this is where we are. This is the sort of the naked truth of our industry as a benchmark. Clearly, if your company cares about revenues, then you're going to want to move first into fashionista, then over to Digerati. But if you care about profitability, or if your company cares more about profitability or market valuation for one reason or another, you may actually want to either go diagonal or move into conservative and then Digerati, which means that you want to invest in know-how before you invest in technology. So either you have to make an investment in technology or know-how, but ultimately you need to make an investment in both. So, so this is the overall framework. Now we have a tactical framework for marketing. Now, many of you are marketers, whether you're product marketers or in corporate marketing, and let's see where you are and where you can actually make some tactical changes in order to improve the digital maturity. Damien, you want to walk through the 5 just very quickly, give an overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Hamid mentioned, this is obviously focused on marketing now. But you can see on a scale of 1 to 5, basic to advanced, this is the framework that we use to define each of these areas, right? So basic is fairly obvious. I mean, this is where your website contains a lot of product information. Maybe it's even a product catalog. You don't have a lot of advanced functionality. There's very little interactivity. From a marketing automation standpoint, you don't have any tools that are currently set up. There's not a central CRM. When you're looking at web KPIs and just KPIs in general, they tend to be focused on some of the simplistic things like traffic and bounce rate and things like that. As we progress along and we move into more of a tactical, and again, this will make sense when we wrap this up, but this is where you've got some more engaging content on your website. You're starting to implement some of the marketing automation tools that are out there. From a KPI standpoint, they tend to be focused on lead generation, for example, where it's not just it's the basics of website KPIs. As we move into the middle with aligned, this is where you have audience-specific content and some more advanced functionality. So audience-specific content being, really, inbound. When you think about it, I mean, audience-specific content is really a reflection of what your audience is interested in, right? It's almost like a mirror into what they are seeking out. So if you're really embracing inbound, that's how your website should really be reflecting that in the content. From a marketing automation standpoint, you've got regularly running multi-touch campaigns. There might be some segmentation that you're doing with your CRM. You're starting to move to KPIs that are much more related to the actual funnel and the buyer's journey. As we move along into strategic, this is where you've got from an engagement standpoint, you've got social communities that you're having regular dialogue. You're not just pushing content out there via your social channels. You're actually listening to what people and customers are talking about in relation to your brand, your products, and your services. You're putting some thought leadership content out there. You can see that with your CRM, your database is seen as a key asset, especially as it relates to nurture programs. And then we move into advanced, where this is where everybody wants to be, which is easier said than done, where your website, it really is a central hub or what we call a central machinery for all marketing, right? You've got extensive channels that are driving a large portion of the traffic. So basically, you're surrounding your corporate website and really taking advantage of all the digital channels that you have available to you. From a marketing automation standpoint, you've got a total customer lifetime management. You've got a sophisticated CRM platform in place, and then your KPIs are actually tied to revenue, right? You're not necessarily worried about traffic and bounce rates and did they download a PDF or did they watch the video? It actually is, well, how does that all net out in relation to revenue? So that's the framework that we use to define what you're going to see here, which represents basically everything that we've been talking about to this point, right? We wanted to establish what exactly is that baseline, and we actually compared it to last year. And the majority of the respondents are in the tactical position, which is the red bubble that you see here on screen. Slightly behind that was the green bubble, which is aligned. But overall, on average, the industry is sitting somewhere between tactical and aligned, right? It's a slight movement up from last year, which does indicate some progress. But overall, it's not like there's been a huge shift into strategic and/or advanced, and so that was the snapshot that we took when we're taking a look at that framework and then applying it to all the respondents and taking a look at just where the industry sits today. Hamid, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think it's interesting that as an industry, we score ourselves as just under a 2.5 out of 5. With respect to digital, and so we actually took a different framework on this. All those, if you saw, like, there was 5 key attributes to each of those levels that we measured, and so in the next slide, we put that on a spider graph, which I think actually this is where sort of it gets interesting for me, and you're going to want to pay attention to this because this is where the takeaways are. Is the website engagement, marketing automation, CRM, and measurement together make up the tactical framework for digital maturity. And so as you can see, the blue line is the single lowest respondent that we had, and the green line was the highest scored respondent that we had, and the thick yellow line is the average. And so as you can see, where do we actually measure ourselves as being sort of tactical versus aligned or wherever, it looks like that as an industry average, we have invested more into CRM, but we don't have the rest of the infrastructure figured out to really leverage from the database that we have. That's sort of the key, the observation that I make. And now we have 4 key takeaways. Now this is where, again, our recommendation to you as marketing of what you can do today. The very first one is actually the paradox of all of this is that digital maturity is not necessarily about technology. That's only one axis. You can have the greatest technology in the world, but it's more about understanding human psychology. And it's more about developing content that tell good stories that drive people in and drive them to action. Very clearly, there's also, even within storytelling, you can tell kinds of stories that don't drive action, and there are ones that do drive action. So you really want to actually focus more on your customer than on your technology by itself. So that's really number 1 takeaway. It's kind of overarching. Now let's get even more tactical. Takeaway number 2, lowest hanging fruit. We believe that measurement is really an area where even the highest performers scored themselves, even the highest single performer scored themselves as a 3. And so implementing a social listening program that brings together data from the outside, what's happening in the social sphere of your world, combined with your own internal data in a single actionable dashboard. When we do this for our clients, they actually, if we do it as we do it on a monthly basis, for example, what clients get and they are able to see is, what should I be doing right now? And that essentially gives you the opportunity to really move and become more digitally mature, because you are sensing the market and you're sensing what's happening. If you remember, the 3rd highest priority that the respondent set gave us was, I need more customer intimacy so that I can develop better kinds of content. Well, this is your lever in order to do that. It's not the only lever, but it's a really powerful one.
And the one thing
the 3rd takeaway. Yeah, go right ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The one thing I would add to that too is that, social listening, when you talk about the technology and the platforms, it's almost silly to not have one of these today, right? Because they are affordable. There's various levels that you can invest in. But the key here is that you don't do social listening where you just listen to yourself, right? Where you literally, as you're configuring the social listening tool, you're literally putting in branded terms. That's other cohorts and other customers are talking. Like you want to get a sense of what the market is actually talking about when you're not in the room, right? So that's one of the key things as you're setting up that social listening program, is to really make sure that you're not just listening to yourself. So sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. No, it's okay, and it's a really good point. I can understand why companies don't do this or marketers don't do this, because data are like calories. You can get calories from broccoli, and it's good for you. Or you can get calories from candy, and it's gonna, make you feel bad. And it's overwhelming, and not just overwhelming as in like, I don't know what to do, because marketers are really, really smart people. But really boiling it down to what's actionable for you is where there's, very specific frameworks that need to be developed in order to decipher that content. Let's move to the 3rd takeaway. Here's where I really focus on. So lead generation is a critical aspect of this industry, and we as an industry spend a ton of money on it. And you spend a lot of effort driving and creating a lead generation engine. Audiences, if you really put yourself in the shoes of audiences, or if you study their behavior, they act in very predictable ways if you give them the right signals for acting in predictable ways. And so I would review your website or your campaign landing pages, as well as your outbound content, to ask myself, what kind of a psychological incentive can I give someone to take the action I want them to give? And there are very predictable ways that audiences act or react if you've given them the right signals. There are 6 really critical ones that I'm not going to get into here, but happy to share if anybody's interested in a follow-up. This makes a big deal and a big difference between whether your marketing is just sort of getting the conversion rates that everybody else gets, and maybe 10 times or higher the kinds of response or reply rates that you should be getting based on the money that you're spending. And then the fourth takeaway is connected to that. It's tightly connected to that. And if you look, the highest performing companies are focusing on inbound, which means that they're focusing on the inbound content. They're really leveraging marketing automation and the specificity of their customer relationship management. But as an average, the industry's behind. So marketing automation, unfortunately, the sort of the off-the-shelf vanilla strategy is really to create some content that somebody's interested in, and then bait them to come and consume that content, and then maybe get their name and email address and move forward. I want you to stop thinking about it that way, because the market is just oversaturated with that kind of stuff. Look, the bottom line is people are starting to reject the idea of paying or even transacting on primary publications, let alone marketing content. That oversaturation is not going to win us any favors. What we need to do is inspire them with kinds of content, and also very importantly with experiences. So let me talk about a way, for example, that you can go from tactical all the way to advanced without sort of making stepwise into aligned. Everyone thinks of your lead generation form as just like, okay, well, I'm just going to minimize the number of questions that I ask, or minimize the information that I get. That is the moment where your customer is taking action. That is the moment where you can actually change their behavior. Ask them questions that opens up their eyes and makes them think differently about the particular topic. We've actually created something that we call digital dialogue, where we invite people in and we engage them in a series of questions and answers. And in the course of that engagement, we open up a new way for them to think about a particular topic, and then dive into what information is interested to them, and then measure how interested they are in a value proposition. So we first contextualize them and reframe their thinking, and then we deliver the value proposition. And the conversion rates and the interest with which they convert to those value propositions is significantly higher than any of the other lead generation tactics we've seen to date. So that's another key takeaway, is you should rethink what inbound means. It's no longer sort of content for clicks or content for email address. It's truly, you have the opportunity and the power to do some dialoguing. Right. So I'll just stop there. I think that we have a few questions coming in, but before we conclude, and I want to actually talk with Damien about some of these questions, but feel free to contact both of us with any additional information. In about 2 to 3 weeks, we plan on writing a full report with all the data that we captured that we're happy to share with you if you let us know that you'd like to receive that report. So thank you again. Let's dive into the questions. So some people are actually interested in those 6 signals that I mentioned that can significantly change your conversion rates because of behavior. So several people have written that, somebody else who I actually know, who's becoming a dear friend and a colleague of mine, is commenting on the candy broccoli, of where the data come from. And I say that a lot when I give talks, and it gets a chuckle from people, but it's absolutely true. People can swim in data. I mean, to the point about what we were talking about earlier, is it's not just about KPI or metrics. It's about what matters. It's about the business impact. And so if we don't have a way of measuring what's happening and sensing what's happening in the marketplace, then we're really making decisions in a vacuum. And many of you have some really tremendous databases of customer information and customer behavior that can be a goldmine. And I would highly recommend using that, but don't forget sort of your sensing and listening to the average.
Just to add to that too, I mean, I'm sure a lot of the marketers that are on the call today can relate to this. Where, I mean, you have so much data. Hamid mentioned that you're swimming in it. And at the end of the day, like, what are you actually doing with that, right? Because I mean, I know from my time at working at large organizations like an IBM, where you literally have so much access to it, and it's like you're almost piling on spreadsheets that are collecting dust, right? You've got to Amit's point, you've got these gold mines of information that would help you go to market or help you engage with customers better. But a lot of times it comes down to enablement. Like, who has got the time to extract all this data and then, more importantly, interpret it and turning it into action? And that's one of the things that we do with the digital dialogue is, what are, based on all this data and all these spreadsheets you're taking a look at, what are the 4 to 5 things you could do next week that would help with either your website or your CRM or all the different factors that we talked about.
Yeah. So there's actually, so I just want to pause here and just say there's about 2 or 3 questions that I want to get to before we conclude here. But many people are writing saying that they're very interested in those 6 signals to get the behavior, and I think this warrants a follow-up, as well as many people are interested in that digital dialogue tool that I was mentioning in getting them. And one question specifically to that is, what's a good leading question to get a customer to engage in a dialogue? I will tell you, this is the best way to get people to change is to ask them for advice first. You see what I mean? Because it opens the door, and this is all kinds of anecdotes around this. But engaging them in a dialogue is, you can do it in a variety of ways. One way to do it is to provoke them with a stance. So essentially, you go to market and you say, we noticed that this is happening. What do you think? And that by itself, and it had that this thing that's happening, it's about them in their world, in their job, in their area of research, not about us. This is the #1 habit that we as marketers have to change, is that we are just taught to lead by talking about ourselves. And we have to change that and lead by talking to others and then listening. And so a really good leading question, a really tasty leading question that a scientist or a clinician just can't resist, is ask them about something about their job, but know that it's provocative. Like, I mean, just to give you an example, if you walk into any ICU, anywhere in the world, there are key things that they care about in the ICUs. If you're talking to anybody in genomics, there are key trends that are happening. But there's also sort of these things that everyone's thinking, but nobody's saying. Those are the best ones. You could lead that way, and you could ask them for advice, and you can engage them in dialogue. Good salespeople know how to do this. Marketing should actually do this en masse and develop that. So that's one. Somebody actually asks, can you expand by what you mean on social listening program? Damien, you want to take that one? Just very quickly, 1 minute, talk about what we mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you're at on the scale that we talked about. But if you're in the beginning stages, and I'd be happy to follow up with you after, there's easily 5 to 10 to even 20 platforms that are very affordable that you should be setting up immediately, right? And then, to my point earlier, where it's almost like the way you configure and turn the dial and push the buttons on these platforms is really important, because you don't want to just fill it up with branded terms. Because if you fill it up with branded terms, the output is going to be, it's not actionable. It's all going to be based on, listening to yourself. So one of the things that I've done in the past, and I feel a lot of brands should be doing, is actually combining your search marketing data with your social listening activities. So if you think about it, what you're really trying to do is identify the voice of the customer, right? So if you think about what people are Googling from an organic search and from a paid search standpoint, you should have access to a lot of that data, right? You could use that as input into the social listening platform, so that you're getting the output is not just more branded content. You're actually getting a sense of what the market is actually interested in. So that would be the first thing, is to actually pick a platform and then begin the configuration process. But then, more importantly, once you've got it configured properly and you've got some outputs, that's when you start engaging with your audience, right? That's when you can identify, say, a top 10 list of influencers and begin inviting them to trade shows or upcoming industry events. You might want to ask for their opinion on a white paper that you're walking, or be a guest contributor in a video or a blog. That's what, like, that social influencer outreach is is really critical. But you can't do that without the platform, and especially if the platform is not configured correctly. So hopefully I'm rushing through that really quick, but hopefully I answered your question there.
Yeah. Essentially, it's looking at the kinds of conversations that are happening on search and social and marrying them with the data that you have inside of your own company, like your web traffic, your AdWords spend, and there's a variety of tools that you use to bring all that data together, but not what a single tool doesn't give you that actionable dashboard, and making sure that you're looking at it from a holistic perspective.
Right.
We can certainly share examples of this kind of report or data if we're able to. If any of you are interested in, just type in a comment and we'll follow up with you on this on a specific, specifically. Okay, so somebody else is actually asking a follow-up with respect to what we mean by these platforms. Could you name one or two, Damien? I mean, there's many of them out there, but could you name one or two of these platforms?
Oh yeah.
So that people
there's a whole bunch of them depending upon your available budgets and the size of your company. I mean, one of them that jumps out to me is Hootsuite. I've used that in the past, and it's a very a very easy to use platform. A lot of the platforms, to be honest with you, I've used several of them. A lot of them do the same thing. So I would look at how many licenses you get, how much listening you're actually able to do with the platform. So Hootsuite is one of them, and one of the tools that we've used is called Mention, which allows you to tap into the social chatter, but also it aggregates where conversations are happening in the blog space and things like that. Hootsuite, Mention, there's a handful of others that I'd be happy to follow up with you on, but I would investigate those two. And honestly, I would go to Google and do a search for social media platforms, and there's a ton of sites out there that aggregate all the platforms available. They'll give you a quick cost breakdown and how many licenses you get. So that's a good way to do some research as well.
Yeah. So final question, and I love this question. This is, again, from a dear colleague. If our industry is behind in terms of digital acumen, is there another industry that we could or should benchmark against that could provide some nuggets of valuable information? That's a great question. And actually, when we went back to this original Capgemini report that was done, it's a few years old now, but the model is what we thought was really critical for our industry. What are some of the other industries that are that we should be benchmarking? And I'll answer this in two ways. I don't necessarily think there is an industry that fits our specific need exactly the way that we need it, because of the potential for government regulations, and B, the highly technical information, and C, the fact that it's just clearly a B2B market because there are institutional dynamics at play on your customer side, and those institutional dynamics are different from industry to industry. However, I'll tell you that what we've done at Linus is we've benchmarked companies in B2B spaces that have highly technical information that they share with their technical audiences, and which ones are doing really well with that and which ones are not doing well with that. So again, if anybody's interested, we can share with you that information. Companies like Boeing come to mind. They've done a phenomenal job in storytelling. Even within our own industry, there are some companies. J&J has done a phenomenal job, especially in their innovation segment. In Janssen Pharmaceuticals, they're doing a really good job of that. And many other companies have, these great strategies. IBM, which is where Damien comes from, had done a great job in leveraging digital marketing when they went from being when they transformed themselves from a computer hardware company to essentially a consulting company. So there are specific companies that I would recommend looking at rather than specific industries that I would rather look at, because the dynamics are different. So we are at the top of the hour, and I want to thank everybody for listening in and for the great engagement. For those of you who made comments that we didn't address, we will follow up via email. For those of you who are interested in either the follow-up on those behavioral signals or the digital dialogue, I'm going to work with my colleagues to follow up on that. But again, My name is Hamid Ganadan, and on behalf of Damien and everybody else at Linus who participated in this, I want to thank you for your attention. Thanks and take care. So Damien, I think you're gonna we're gonna cut this and be on our way. Thanks everybody for listening. Take care.